Welcome to the realest podcast you'll ever listen to. I'm LT.
I'm Kiki.
And we're here to talk blunt.
Black ladies, unequivocally North Tulsa. Let's talk blunt talk.
Are you ready to talk blunt?
I am.
What do you want to talk about today?
Today, I want to talk about the workplace and what I'm calling the visible cap.
Is it visible or is it invisible?
It's visible.
All right.
And here's why I say it's visible. Because I'm looking at an article and the Biden administration notes that for that woman is paid still in today's in 2024, a woman still makes 84 cents less on the dollar than a man, and a woman of color makes even less. So the pay inequities are real, and I just believe that there's this cap that, um, intentional or unintentional, is kind of keeping women from building generational wealth in certain time within the workplace.
So I actually can share a story, and you say visible, I say invisible. I'm one of those people that I really have struggled with believing that that still exists today. And so I witnessed an experience of a friend I know, a situation I know where the individual had received a job, they'd gotten an offer on a new job, and then someone was hired in 6 months after them and received a significant higher pay. This individual didn't even know that the person had received a significant higher pay, really hadn't lobbied for more money when they accepted their offer. Luckily, they had a supervisor who really intervened on their behalf and spoke with the HR and said, we really need to bring this person up to equity. And because of that, they received a significant increase to match the Caucasian female that was hired in at a significant higher salary with less experience. So that for me was a wake up call that this really does occur and is still occurring in 2024.
So I'm
Um,
curious. I'm gonna
mhm,
stop you right there because
mhm.
I'm curious as to why you didn't see that prior to that event. Like, what was it that? Because I've always, and I guess maybe it's my HR background, but and I started in HR early on in my career. That was kind of one of the jobs I had, not fresh out of college, but not far from it. So I've always known that pay equity was an issue. Even, when I was working I used to do contract temporary assignments for different companies. And not only was there a pay equity gap between men and women, but there was a pay equity gap between people of a certain age. Like, they wanted to pay someone older more, not necessarily more qualified than someone who was younger, but had, say, a degree. But an older one, well, they have more experience. I can depend on them to come to work. There was just different reasons at that time. And that was a while ago as to why to pay someone more or less. So I guess I'm just curious, why did it take that event for you to see that there were inequities in the way people are compensated in the workplace?
So I think there were two things for me. So first of all, I think that our personalities play a lot into it. So for me, I'm just kind of a one of those people that kind of go at face value. If the salary offer you came with me is one of those that works for me, I'm not necessarily worried about what the other person next to me. That's just not something I've ever been into. But I think the other part, um, that I think made me feel like that didn't happen is to your point, you said you've worked in HR. Okay, well, having been, um, in management for a significant amount of years and negotiating salaries, I've never felt as though, um, I hadn't witnessed that in any of the salaries that I've ever, and I have to work with my HR colleagues to be able to set a salary. I never saw those practices. I had never witnessed those. So I think that's why I was kind of always blind to it. And um, I've always felt like that the average person walking around really don't understand how salaries are even calculated and how they come about. And so I've always felt like, okay, well, we just kinda and this I know this is kind of one of those things where we differ on, but I'm like, okay, we need to move past the days of old and, and not focus so much on those pieces. And I felt like that a lot of times people just focus more on that when I've heard those, and people just really don't understand how salaries are calculated, was really that was my blindness to it, and I'm just being honest and transparent here, I'm talking bluntly. I was biased to it, and so I share that because there's probably some other people out there that is also, blind to it and don't think that it really exists today, but it really does still exist, but I was just clueless to the fact, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I also think that there's, you know, it going to work is not connected necessarily to building wealth. And I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive,
Right,
but you go to work, it's a job, you don't necessarily expect to get wealthy at your job.
right.
But I think you have to look at the fact that you spend 80, 90% of your time working.
Mhm.
If you are doing that at a pay that's less than what you should be working at, that in itself is going to impact generationally how you provide for your family.
Absolutely. So when we talk about the inequities that exist, why do you think they exist? Especially coming from an HR background. Why do you think they exist?
I mean, I think it goes back to systems and systemic policies and procedures. Until organizations start to really go in and do compression analysis and other type of salary audits, there is not going to be a real change in what we do. And I don't think you can talk about it. We had our last podcast talked about angry.
Mhm.
It's not an anger issue for women; it's an equity issue, and again, it's an equity issue for women of color. But I think a lot of times because of the uniform or because the way people approach different conversations, it can be looked at as, they're jilted or it's an old conversation. They need to let it go. But I think the reality is with the price of inflation, how much we're paying for gas, bread, just normal commodities, pay is becoming more and more prevalent. I'm concerned about pay for my kids, and being able as a parent, knowing that it's going to take them longer to build up a savings to own a home, how can I continue to contribute not to just my children, but my children's children?
Right.
And that to me goes back into my main source of income, which is pay equity. And I think that's where when you get a promotion on a job or when you take a new job, teaching women how to negotiate their
Mhm.
salaries, teaching women that it's okay to say, you know what, I'd like to a counter offer and
Mhm.
here's why and this is the foundation for why I believe I should be making more money. It's okay to do that. Oftentimes women, girls, we're taught not to push back.
Right.
And that has created some of the gaps. And I think also the fact that, for years women stayed home and men went to the office. And when you talk about black women, we were the ones taking care of the homes, a lot of times for working women and men. And so some of it is society, and getting out of those society norms and being able to have a blunt conversation on pay equity and why you need to pay people based on their qualifications and skills and not the way they look or their background.
Talking bluntly, do you think that um, there's a myth or a thought or somewhere maybe it's even subconsciously, not even consciously effort that um, this male needs this amount of money, this female don't because they don't even need to be here working?
I do. I mean, honestly, I think there is some undertones of that. I still think there's undertones of people that think that people of color aren't smart as, you know, Caucasians, white people. I think there's those undertones that unfortunately still exist, are
Oh,
bred and
absolutely.
taught. So I think that as long as we have those, we have to continue to have the blunt conversations and challenge our leaders, challenge our CEOs, our COOs, to look at and continuously look at our equity pay. Because I think generationally, you're going to have more people leaving traditional jobs that we depend on in our country to keep us moving, living, like nurses, educators. You're having people leave these fields because they see, what, I can go out and make more money doing, something more creative and something more spontaneous than a traditional job that my mom or dad did. And we need people at the bedside. We need educators. So we have to address the pay equity issues in order to keep workforce alive.
So before we move this, because I've got another angle I want to go to, but before we go far, I want to go back and touch a little bit more on something you said because you talked about doing salary reviews, but from my lens and what I know about salary reviews won't necessarily fix these inequities that we're talking about. Because when you think about salary reviews, first of all, understanding that you got your min, your mid, and your max salary. And if you are already making above mid in the traditional salary grades, not always. I know there's organizations that's starting to think a little bit differently, but traditionally, if you're already above mid, you aren't going to even get a salary increase and be looked at, which further compresses the salary gap. So, really, an organization would have to choose to truly do a salary audit and do it from the lens of equity and really diversity and inclusivity.
Hmm.
I mean, because if you don't look at it from all those angles, then you're not gonna really fix the issue. I mean, from your HR side, would you agree with that?
I agree. I think, that's very true. I go back to processes and procedures
Mhm.
and having, you know, organizations have those conversations amongst the C suite and how they get that done. It shouldn't take a year, in my mind, you know, for you to make adjustments in salaries.
Right.
But sometimes it takes a year or 2 years. I think that, and for whatever reasons, organizations' infrastructures are very different. And I think, like people, you have to meet organizations where they are. But I also think we have to be cognizant of the role inequities within pay play in terms of those frontline employees that toe the road in organizations and how they are working multiple jobs to put their kids through school, to put food on the table, to make doctor's appointments. And how do we move the needle on that? And I think we just have to look at it in with a little bit more agility because it's impacting women in a great way, but it's impacting our society even greater.
Well, it's an interesting time to be having a topic like that because um, on the post of a pandemic, we first know that the climate, organizational climates and ability to survive, is there's financial imbalance across many organizations today. But at the same time, we also are very much Everybody's focusing on DEI right now. So we're saying one thing, but we're acting something differently. And so you got to balance the two. And then we just also come off the heels of the Great Resignation and people who don't really want to go to work. We've got a generation who um especially have been able to work at home remotely, don't want to come back in. So turnover is big. And there's so many things that's competing.
Well, and from a blunt perspective, let's just go back to the pandemic and talk about the side hustles that were generated from being in
This
the
too.
pandemic. I
This too.
mean, the side hustles were real to the point where I think organizations didn't understand the impact of somebody baking cookies at home and then be able to bag them cookies up and then go sell them. Oh my good, it was crazy. And I think
Well, we were selling masks in the middle of the pandemic. So, I mean, why not sell a bag of cookies that you baked? Yeah, the side hustle was real.
yeah, the side hustle was real, but I just think those side hustles, you talk about people
Let me clear that up. Not me selling masks, okay? To make sure I clear that up. Not me selling masks. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
when I think about you talked about people not wanting to work, I would disagree. I think people want to work, but they want to work on their own terms. And I think that's the side hustle. Is right. Like I don't have to sit at a desk and 8 to 5 head to the computer. I can be productive. I can walk. I can, you know, go work out at my on my lunch break or at an unknown hour and still make money. And I think that's what the pandemic challenged our economy with is making that side hustle a reality and doing something you love. Steve Harvey, I think it's Steve Harvey that has one of those quotes. No, it was Dion. I'm sorry. Deion Sanders has a TikTok out there where got all these inspirational, and he said, if it's a job, if you go to work and you feel like you on a job, then you're not doing what you were called to do.
Are we quoting Deion Sanders now?
Girl, we have evolved. Jay State, I gotta quote Dion. I'm just gonna keep it real. Dion, look at it. Look at his stuff. I mean, I think he has a point as a coach. He's like, when I'm coaching, that's not my job. That's my passion. And I think what the pandemic did was it brought out a lot of people's passions. It brought out the passion of, I've always wanted to bake cookies, and I'm a great cookie baker, and I'm gonna sell my cookies. And like, we ain't got nothing else to do. You at home, bake some cookies.
So this is probably a topic for another day, but I would argue that the pandemic didn't create. I mean, we were already there. We've got millennials coming, and this is what they and so the pandemic opened that door.
The pandemic gave it a seal of approval, basically because it did what we already knew.
We've been talking about life balance, work-life balance, work-life balance, work-life balance, work-life balance.
Was talking about it. Millennials were doing it. Don't text me between the hours of 9 because I'm with my
Birthday off and my yeah.
so but
We
what it
need you to get to work, punch a clock.
but what it did was it proved what people knew, that we didn't have to be in a building at work to work. Now you're seeing another shift because you got all this real estate, which is another blunt talk. You got all this real estate out there that they're like just
What are we gonna do with it?
so what? Now they calling people slowly back to work.
Kind of like downtown Tulsa, just like empty in the middle of the day. Okay.
But think about the small mom and pops, the coffee shops, the lunch shops, the things that were thriving during that time. So why, how do we again strike that balance between, my thing is if we got empty buildings, how can we recreate and reimagine those buildings and still be able to have people be at home with their families, or one car families. Prior to the pandemic, it was almost a must in certain areas. You had to have 2 cars, and then people realized, well, wait a minute, if I'm at home and you got to work, we can only have 1 car and we can still live the way we want to live.
Right.
So again, back to the topic of visible caps or invisible caps. I think we have to continue to have blunt conversations around pay equity for women and women of color. And in order to move the needle on this topic, we have to remember the pay equity is not just about working, it's about building generational wealth and expectations for our families.
So when we talk about salary caps and we're talking bluntly, what about, because I feel like this falls right into the salary inequities, is that uh career ladder. Um and being able to, as females and as African American females, being able to move into um well, being able to move up the ladder and being able to move into the C-suite.
Absolutely.
What's your thoughts about that? Because I think that there's still, that's where I think I probably focused on, um, previously more than the actual salary, was the lack of the ability to be able to move up and still being considered, there's a, especially in corporate America, there's still very much a, good old boys club, and, we need to be able to go play golf together, and if you can't come out and play golf with me today, you probably can't be my peer.
I think there's some of that exists. Well, yes, there is some of that exists. And those are the untangible things that aren't discussed in the workplace. The ability to be in certain social settings. To be in that setting, you have to first be invited.
That's right.
So it's not necessarily about me not knowing how to play golf so much as in me getting invited to play golf.
And do I wanna learn to play golf?
Right. I mean, do I have to play golf for us to have a conversation? I can just walk with you in the green. You know what I'm saying? So it's reimagining those spaces and not just keeping that traditional format just because it's always been there. Men in golf. Golf is a woman's sport too. But again, even if I don't know how to play golf, invite me to the game and let's have the conversation all the same.
Right.
If you want to, have the conversation, but don't make it contingent upon me yet having to meet another pillar in order to move into that C suite.
So one of the things that we always try to do with Blog Talk is not just talk about the problems, but also have solutions to the problems. So when we think about these inequities and that we are discussing today, what do we do about this?
I go back to challenging our CEOs, our COOs, our CFOs, having succession planning in place. That's number one.
True.
Understanding that you don't want to have positions that basically cap out. Where do people go, even if they have to go to the side and up? But what does that look like? And being transparent about it. We use transparency a lot in corporate America, and we want to be transparent until we get to certain
Right.
conversations.
Until we don't want to be.
Right, right. And so I think in order for us to move the needle, we have to be transparent. This conversation is really about having a forum at work. I think you said you had a forum at work where they asked you to speak about pay equity and being an African American woman in your position. I've spoken at work about being an African American woman and how, what is it like to have an executive role. I think we just have to continue, and as organizations open up these conversations, continue to open them up, but also don't just talk about it. Start making those movements to doing some succession planning, doing some mentorship training, doing those things that as people approach you in the workplace and say, "Hey, I want to move up. What do I do?" Great question. Here's what you do. Here's the ladder. Here's the plan. Some organizations do that well and others not so much. And where we suffer, I believe, is in our public and government organizations.
Well, I think we also want to empower um, our listeners, but you know, young females coming along, especially African American, for those who may be naive, like I was out there, to think that it doesn't exist, or for those who just really haven't ever thought about it, that don't just accept the first salary that come along, but push back. and make sure you know, my late pastor used to always say, "A closed mouth can't get fed." All they can do is say no, you know? But you might get a yes, and you might get a, more than what you thought. But if you don't even inquire, because sometimes we allow, and I'm truly speaking for myself who was naive. We may allow or also support that system by not challenging the status quo of what they offer you. So I think we have to empower and teach um, young females, especially of color, to speak up and not just accept the first offering that come their way.
Right. And how you do that is first and foremost, thank you for this offer. It's very generous. I'd like to be considered for a different salary. This is why, and have that open conversation. I mean, I think it's okay to counter offer and whatever that looks like for you. So if you're out there, if you're listening, if you have great tips on how to counter offer a job offer, send it our way. We'll share it with our audience, and that way, women, people in general, can learn how. If you feel like you've been offered a salary that's lower than a salary you anticipated, there are ways to counter that and ways that you can overcome that.
And do your homework. Do your
Yes.
homework in ahead of time. Already know what the ranges should be looking like for that job and where you fit. And most importantly, I would say as a female and not just around salaries, know your worth
Yes. Know your
and
worth.
let no one tell you that you're not worthy.
And
Know your
that's
worth.
real blunt talk right there.
Yeah.
Know your worth.
Know your worth. We can stop it right there. And here's a moment we have agreed upon. Doesn't matter if it's visible or invisible. We're gonna know our worth.
Sticking with the visible cat.
Okay, and I'm sticking with the invisible. Obviously, it was invisible to me. So that's blunt talk. It's been real.